Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are back again together. A very warm welcome and namaste. Jim Rohn has very aptly quoted, if you are not willing to risk the usual, you will have to settle down for the ordinary. Our guest today, Dr. Ellisa Bruno, is a true example of hard work and dedication. She is an MA and Juris Doctorate and is an award-winning and best-selling author specializing in emotionally intelligent leadership and preventing legal risks. She is an international keynote speaker. iTunes ranked her radio program Heart to Heart Conversation on Leadership, your guide to making a difference, in its top 20 K-12 podcasts. She served as an assistant attorney general for the state of Maine and assistant dean at the University of Maine School of Law. While working as associate professor and academic dean at the University of Maine, Augusta, Holy Ellisa was selected Outstanding Professor and alumni to Howard University's Institute of Educational Management. She has taught courses for Wheelock College as part of Boston University, most recently in Singapore. Her first book, Leading on Purpose, was published by McGraw-Hill in 2008. Its sequel, What You Need to Lead Emotional Intelligence in Practice, has been one of Nikki's bestseller. Managing Legal Risks, Teachers College Press is another bestseller. The Comfort of Little Things received the Living Now Award for books in any field that uplift the quality of life. Her sixth book, Happiness, is running through the streets to find you, translating trauma harsh legacy into healing 2020, sold out almost immediately. She brings the same humor, compassion, substance, inspiration, and ability to engage participants to virtual keynoting as she does to in-person keynoting. Please welcome Dr. Holy Ellisa Bruno. Good evening and
Namaste. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so glad to be with you again. And hello to all of the people listening. You have been through a lot. Your family is going through a lot. Everyone around you has lived in some kind of fear. Everyone around you has lived in uncertainty. It's been decades, if not a century, since many of us pandemically have faced such trauma. And what I'd like to focus on with you today and with everybody listening is how can we translate trauma's harsh legacy into healing? And the thing that's what I'd like to invite. So let me just ask you that, if you're willing to say, what is one of the toughest lessons you have learned during this time?
it's quite a difficult question.
Yes, for all of us, because it's painful to talk about this stuff. And I'm inviting the listeners too. What is one of the hardest lessons you have learned, and yet that lesson will help you? Because there's the paradox in every challenge is this gift. If I can simply have the courage, if I can find the courage to face the challenge, to turn around and walk toward what's scaring me as opposed to running away from it, if I can find that courage, embedded in the courage is hope, and embedded in hope is another way to do things. I believe honestly, and we're going to talk about this, that trauma can bring out depths of creativity.
Yes.
In adults and in children. And and it can also bring out depths of originality, which is to say, and we'll talk more about that, how do we find our own way when there's no prescribed way for us? So I'm wondering if you can tell us, what's just one of the many different learnings you've had.
Biggest lesson that we learned during pandemic is that a family has to be united to come out of any problem. A family is not like just it's not something that everybody can be in different corners. Even though staying in different corners and different parts of the world, you need to be united. You need to have that connect. Whether you are here, like we have a connect. I'm in India, you are in US, and we are regularly connected. We know that, okay, if there is something wrong, you are there for me to talk about, and I'm there for you to talk to.
And I
You are
feel
always there to
that's
guide me, always there to guide me. So whenever I'm stuck, I can definitely rely on you, and I can just drop a message. I need your suggestion, and that's what you've been doing.
and
Now,
notice what's going on. I did not mean to interrupt, but I think you've already said many things that are crucial. One is the pandemic and trauma invites us to be truthful, because that is not always encouraged without pandemic. In other words, I need to be truthful with myself emotionally and say, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a pathway for this. I don't have a way of understanding this from the past. How can you and I, and then here's the next step, is after self-honesty is then just what you said, to reach out to another trusted person and tell the truth. I do not know how to do this alone. Can we figure it out together? And what you said is also very powerful about trusting the family. Because what do we do when we have people, and I'm sure you have these, in my family, I have people that, they're all over the place and all over the place emotionally and mature in terms of maturity. And what do I do when someone is holding on to a resentment, or someone is not by nature cooperative, or someone is perhaps even narcissistic, just totally only focused on herself? And one of the things I've needed to do, which Rena, you've just said that you're doing, is sometimes I have what's called a chosen family. I have people all around the world like you do. And I say to them, I need help. And can we please talk this through? And I think what we've done, and I want to hear what you think about this, is we have created new family structures.
yes.
Can you tell me more about what that's like for you?
Undoubtedly, yes. Okay, now let's start. What we have been discussing since yesterday is one day I was just sitting around and I was just penning down something. So I said, why don't we start something where we can find out ways and means to correlate pandemic and education? So there came the there was a bulb inside my brain that suddenly lit up, and it said, okay, fine, it should be pandemic versus education, because education has suffered a lot due to pandemic. So now that is how I created pandemic versus education, hope to cope up and normalize. So what is your vision, your thought about this? I'll go off screen. Now it's all yours.
Thank you. And I'll be inviting you back soon. What you're saying there is powerful. And I'm inviting everybody who's with us, I'm inviting you to ask yourself, given the drawbacks, the trauma, the blows, the setbacks that you've experienced in this last year, what has that helped you learn about your own gifts and your own strengths that you can use when it comes to being an educator? And by educator, I mean perhaps you are a family member who have children in your family, and now you've become the primary educator. Maybe you were a barrister, maybe you were a doctor, maybe you were a person who didn't, perhaps you were a teacher, but most of us are put in now by this pandemic situations we didn't expect to be in. And there's the answer. There's the answer to Ms. Rena's question. When we are given what we don't want, how can we transform that into not only what we want, but what we need to be creative? And I want to go into that because when we are not in a crisis, we tend to regularize things very easily. And I'm a recovering attorney myself, so that I know the importance of putting policies, procedures, everything into place, because what is that about? It's about making security. It's about helping people feel that life is predictable. Well, guess what? Life is not predictable. Did we not find that out? We've all had deaths in our families. I lost my last living uncle. And my first response, this was the first weekend of lockdown, my first response was, I'm going to get on an airplane and I'm going to fly to be with his family, his immediate family. And I knew inside myself, and here's the point, when we know inside of ourselves that something we're thinking of is not true, that something we're thinking of is a little bit off base. It's like having a glass jar with a top that you screw onto it. And when you just can't screw it on, it just doesn't feel right. That is one of the points that the pandemic has given us. It's a point like a blade that can hurt, but it's also a point that invites. It's an invitation to ask myself, how can I claim the best of my own insights and my own originality? Not that I'm brilliant. I'm no Einstein. But guess what? You don't have to be Einstein, and I don't have to be Einstein either. We all have been given the gift of living to this day. And when I think about it, I'm 75 years old. And when I think about living to this day, I didn't just live to this day by surviving. I lived into this day by being creative. When I was given things that felt impossible, felt absolutely impossible, what did I do? And I invite you to think about that too. When you are given something that feels absolutely hopeless, impossible, I can't do anything about it. For example, yes, my uncle Arturo died. He's gone. Nothing I can do about that. That feels like a either or, no choice situation, and in many ways it is. I shall never talk with my Uncle Arthur again, face to face. But let's look at what this might mean in terms of carrying on, not just carrying on with a stiff upper lip and being tough, but carrying on and helping promote the best in life. So what I can do is go deeper. In law, this process is called psi-pray. It means when something changes beyond your control and you can't do things the way you used to, you can't interpret something like a law the way you used to be able to interpret it. When you can't do things the same way, the psi-pray principle means this: how can I dive deeper? How can I go beneath the surface? And how can I claim something that's still true and still true to the vision and the mission, and at the same time, not get stuck in resentment, sadness, pain, feeling inadequate because I can't do things the way I did. So I'm just going to wrap this part reading with doing an example of what I'm talking about. In education, we have done so many things for years. We've documented them. We have measured them. We have proven through database research that they work. And then all of a sudden, we don't have those opportunities anymore. We don't have the classrooms. We have technology. We have families stepping in where professional teachers were. And so for many of us, this became terrifying. How am I going to do this? I have like for a parent, for example, I have my own job. I have my own work. I can't devote 24/7 to being my children's educator. I love my children, but I'm not skilled or trained to be their professional educator. What do I do about this? So there is an opportunity right there. And I'm going to turn this over to Rena, because here's the deal. When we are given a blow, when we are slammed with something that means that we can no longer do things the way we've done them, how can we claim the creativity in ourselves to transform that new opportunity into something that we know is consistent with the timeless principles of education? So, Rena, I want to ask you what are some of these timeless principles of education? And I'll end with this. To me, early childhood education in particular has always been about relationships. It's the child trusts the adult. And in that trusting relationship that is built and maintained and nurtured, a child learns to trust herself. We are offering life skills, not from the outside in so much to children, but we're helping them develop the life skills from the inside out. And so if a child can trust face to face, that child will remember that intrinsically in her body forever. What do we now do when so much of our development of trust needs to be through two things? Separation from each other, which is a paradox, and two, through technology. And my conclusion, this is one very specific conclusion, I researched how doing programs like through Zoom affected the brain. And I discovered some fairly fascinating things, one of which is Zoom burnout, Zoom fatigue. Our brain cells are adapting so rapidly to this whole new way of communicating that we need to take breaks more frequently. And a break doesn't necessarily mean in terms of time, because most of us don't have time to stop and take a break. But here's the truth. If I can laugh at myself, that literally, I'm going to demonstrate this.
Tutto più facile.
That's Italian, but it means tutto più facile. It means I can reset my brain. If I, in the moment, Rena, can laugh at myself, that gives me perspective, and it also activates the prefrontal cortex, because when I'm under stress, when children are under stress, we lose 90 to 95% of our executive function capacity. How are we able to be creative when we don't have our brain working? So that is my question to all of you. Given what we have been given with this pandemic, how can we translate that into creativity? One is to study, which I have, about the effects of this trauma on the brain. But the other thing that I rediscovered is, how do we reset the brain? How do we do that, especially when we're separate from each other? And so there's a whole other question here I'd like to talk with you about and hear from you about, which is how through the distance can we develop educational intimacy?
I think you've hit the bullseye. Because you know what we are doing and how we are transforming education through C's Global Institute. And that's where I've always been troubling you to please guide me what's to be done next. And the only thing that I remember very prominently is that you've told me whatever you are doing, it has to be interactive. It has to have everything involved in it. And I think you'll be very happy to know that we are providing physical fitness online.
Now tell me,
I've answered your question.
I love that you're doing that because that's so important. We live in our bodies. Our spirits live in our bodies. And unless my body is staying somehow healthy, I cannot learn. How are you? Tell us this, because I think the listeners would love to hear this. How are you creating a way to connect with, engage, and activate people physically when you can't touch each other, when you can't be in the presence of each other? What have you discovered, Rena, that works?
The thing is, what I personally believe is we need to give children opportunities where they get involved, engaged. We need to give them opportunities to engage and give them opportunities to innovate their own things, their own what thoughts. Until and unless those thoughts are innovated, they cannot experience. And if they don't experience, they don't learn. And if they don't learn, they don't grow. That is what our motto is: engage, innovate, experience, learn, and grow.
And you know what's beautiful about that? I've just recently been studying the difference between what's called extrinsic memory and intrinsic memory. And I'm going to bring this home just in the way that you did. Physical education needs to involve us and engage us so that we are actually in our bodies. The same principle is true of how we learn. If a person is engaged intellectually only, that's not going to last that long. It's like when I took all attorneys in America, and I think in most countries are required, you cannot become an attorney unless you pass a 2-day, you have to sit for a 2-day examination. And that examination either says you will become an attorney that you've been preparing for years, or you will not. And the problem with that examination is that it, as with many of our examinations in the education system, it asks nothing about how we're going to apply what we've learned. It asks nothing about how I, as an individual, can call upon my particular strengths as an attorney. And it asks absolutely nothing about why I care deeply about some parts of the law and I don't care so deeply about others. No, this exam is only asking me to have extrinsic memory, which means from the Latin word ex means outside in. So if I am pouring information into my brain, which was the old definition of education, then I can pour it out, right? 2 days of like months of pouring, years of pouring in the information, and then 2 days of pouring it out. And that's a measurement of how I'm going to be a lawyer? Absolutely not. But it's the only way that people knew to measure children in the past. What Rena is saying is this: how can the education, which literally means educare, means to lead someone out, to invite someone out of herself, not to put into somebody, but to literally invite someone out of herself. How can I engage with everybody? Children, yes. Staff, yes. Employees, yes. People to whom I report. How can I engage with them in a way that their best self is called out and my best self is called out? And that's one of the things, Rena, that I've learned about, relearned, and also learned anew during this pandemic, that education doesn't mean a thing if it doesn't have meaning to the person. And how do I know what makes meaning for you, Rena? I don't. I need to ask you. I need to ask you. And as I ask you, I need to listen to you, to hear what matters. And as I listen to you, I learn. And then I can say, well, my gosh, here's something else we might do. Or what do you think about this? It's like you just said, it's the engagement, it's the involvement, and it's also the third factor, which is my being honest and true to myself. I
Yes.
have to start there. So can you say more about that? Because not everybody understands that. Some of us think that education is about passing on bodies of knowledge to people.
No, education is about what actually you learn. Because we have been educated, we have gone through our exams, we've done everything, right? But how do we learn? We learn through our practical experiences.
We learn, Rena, because yes, through practical experiences and because something matters to us. And there's the root question. How do we know what's meaningful to each other? How do we know what's meaningful to each child? And now that we are often separated from each other through technology, how can we make meaning? How can we make meaning when we are separated? And that's that's to me the basic question that every good educator, and by good I mean every educator that's able to help the learner discover what the learner needs to discover, okay? Every educator worth her salt knows how to listen.
For this, I'll just speak a line of Ignacio Estrada. He says, if a child cannot learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. That's what.
Can you give us an example of when you've done that? Because that is absolutely the case. Because that removes the blame. We can say, why can't that child learn? She's got this problem or that problem. Well, guess what? If I can point the finger at myself, not to say, Holly, Ellisa, you're a horrible teacher, but instead to say, every minute of my life is an opportunity to grow and to learn. What is this baby, pre-verbal, or what is this young person telling me about himself and herself and how that person learns? For example, we all know about the styles of learning, yes, but many parents weren't educated in this. I had to study it myself. I am something called a kinesthetic learner, and I didn't know that. Kinesthetic learners, as you know, mean we have to be doing, just like Rena said, we have to be doing things with our bodies. We have to be experiencing them. We have to be feeling them course throughout our bodies. And if I'm a child that was raised to sit still in the classroom, I cannot take in information because I'm not getting any information coming in physically. And so that's back to the point, Rena, of choosing, not having to do anything, but choosing to read each child. And I can look at a child that's very active and say, oh, this child is on my last nerve. Or I can look at that child and say, how can I follow the child's lead? That's Maria Montessori, right? How can I follow the child's lead about how the child learns? Maybe we need to go outside.
Yes.
Have you found that?
To some extent, yes. I have tried lots of things with the kids. And now what we have started doing is like, I feel the more, like you said, you're a kinesthetic learner. I'm an auditory and visual learner. So most of us are auditory and visual learners, right? There are just a few of us who are kinesthetic and who are like, who are not on the track, who are not on track. To bring them on track, we need to, like, I'm talking about the kids. We feel that the kids are going on a wrong track. It's not the wrong track that the kids are going. It's us who's pushing them on that track. So
can you give us an example, Rena? I'm just coming
to that.
Good, please do. Yes, thank you.
Because I know, you will not leave me till you don't get the perfect answer. So there have been children, not one, two, or three. There have been many kids who have been really good in sports, really good in activities, singing, dancing, art and craft, but they don't perform well. This is when I was trying to find out why don't kids copy from the board? Because what I found out was that their way of perception is different. They need to be taught in a different manner. Not every child can understand or copy what's written on the board. Not every child will complete the work. But it's an irony that people don't understand that. They think that the child is not doing it purposely. There was a time when I also used to think that why isn't he copying? But when I came to know about all these things, that is where I stopped judging that why isn't he copying. I do focus on writing because if a child is not writing, that means he's not paying attention to a couple of things. I don't know, I'm never in the race of percentage. What I want is when a child goes out, he should be dedicated, determined, focused, and an independent individual who takes the world as it comes.
And isn't that what the gift of the pandemic? The gift of the pandemic is to say, whatever expectations you had, they're not going to come true. Whatever security you had, if it's from the outside in, is not going to last. However, inside of yourself, cultivate curiosity, cultivate pathways to be a lifelong learner, and cultivate your own way to find meaning. Now, the children that I have worked with successfully are children to whom I listen to see what is meaningful to them. If I'm trying to put on top of a child what's meaningful to me, they might do it because they like me, or they might do it because they know it's important to me, but that's more people pleasing. What I want to do with a child is to help that child from as early on as possible realize that the questions she has inside of herself are the questions she needs to answer in life. It was Rilke who said, we must learn to love the questions. And that is a principle of teaching, which is really a principle of learning to love the questions. Rena, I know that you experience this with child after child. If I am imposing something on a child, yes, the child may be obedient and learn it for my sake. However, if I am listening to the child and the child is letting me know through her action, through her words if she's got them, but she's letting me know what fascinates her about this. That is the beginning, for example, of teamwork. If children in a classroom all have the same project, but honey, they're not all going to be looking at this project in the same way. Milagros is going to say, I want to know how the mama would do that. Perhaps, let me think, Atul is thinking, I wonder what are the mechanics of that? How can I make that work? And perhaps Maria is thinking, I don't like this question at all. It really bores me, but here's something I really want to talk about. Let me find a way to connect what I'm thinking of with what we're supposed to be doing here. Now, each one of those children is on a separate path. If I'm looking at them only to impose my expectation, they're not going to have a meaningful experience.
They will never do that.
So say more about that.
That's what I have always been saying, that each child is born with a different ability, capability, and a different set of skill sets, right? We, as educators and parents, we need to find out what are those and first focus on that rather than just focusing on what they are not interested.
And isn't that, see, now that's a question I have for everybody listening, and for you and for me. How do I maintain throughout my life a curiosity, a passion, and a heartfelt desire to learn what other people are fascinated by? I'm not quite sure how I have this capacity, but my whole life, I have been fascinated by people and what motivates them and what they care about. And when I started working with children, I thought, wow, a family with 6 children, each child is so different. What makes that child so different? And how can I get to know that child? So it's a matter, I believe, of, tabula rasa, that old phrase that we either look at people as this blank slate that we dump all this information into, or I look at everybody, including myself, saying, as Maya Angelou said, today is a new day. I've never seen this day before. And back to your theme, Rena, how can we take the tragedy, the trauma, the upset of this pandemic, and as educators, how can we use this to fill up our curiosity, to want to ask more questions, to love those questions? And then here's the truth. I would love for children to go through life asking questions. How does that work? Why am I feeling like that? Why is that person saying that? Do I agree with that person, or might I need to say something else? If we all went through life with questions, we would never be bored. I would love, see, I know when I'm doing well with the children, because they're doing well. And how are they doing well? They never run out of questions. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. Because what has been happening since decades is that as soon as a child enters school, we kill the creativity of the child. Because every child is creative in different sense. We just give them answers. We never question them.
And here's the horrible thing, which I've just been working on another person with, Rena. Am I motivated? In fact, am I controlled by fear? Am I controlled by shame? Or am I motivated by my inherent heart's desire, my soulful desire to make meaning out of things? In the United States, and I know this has happened in other countries, but I've seen this specifically happen. In the United States, our educational system used shaming for years. A child would be judged, and most people do not like to be judged. In fact, if a child is shamed into behaving properly, that child her whole life will inside carry some sort of cognitive dissonance, some sort of discomfort inside themselves. And this could actually lead to physical troubles later on. It's like the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, said that when children are not appreciated or valued or listened to and allowed to express themselves, we develop, that goes sideways into our bodies, and we develop aches and pains. We develop eventually illnesses. That's why children become so susceptible to immune system challenges, why we're prone toward heart disease, why we're prone toward mental illness challenges, and why we're prone toward stroke, because we harbor these things in our body that are tight. If, on the other hand, and Rena, I know you've seen this over and over again, if, on the other hand, I look to the child and I say, who might you become? Now, child might be looking at me like, what is this woman talking about? But if I look at everyone, child and adult, that comes before me, and I say, if the shaming of you doesn't continue, if the scaring of you doesn't continue, in other words, if the controlling of you by I can make you feel bad about yourself, I can make you scared. If I stop that and put that to the side and instead open my heart and say, how can you and how can I support you give something meaningful back to the world? You see, when I look at every adult and every child, that is so powerful. I have two children, they're adults now. My son was labeled very quickly in preschool as having developmental delays, as having all of these challenges. He would not be able to do this or that. And I have always, as his mother, loved him and said, how can my son find his way and find meaning and in his own way be able to offer his value to the world? Because I believe everybody can do that. And here's an example I'll give you, Rena, before I invite you to share about this yourself. I had two older sisters. I'm the youngest in my family. Both of my older sisters were extremely well educated and very hardworking, dutiful daughters. Yes. And one of my sisters got this chronic autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis. She endured that disease for 24 years. She didn't give up. She kept fighting it. And here's the example I want to say about how do we find and invite everyone to find the genius and the gift inside of herself, no matter how many odds are against her. So here's my sister. She has all this education. She has a PhD, and then she has a Juris Doctorate degree. Doctor is who she is. And guess what? Her brain is starting to be addled because of all the plaque in her brain, because of this multiple sclerosis illness. Her body is crumpled. She can no longer ingest food. She has for 8 years a feeding tube. She can no longer communicate. Her muscles and they're just not forming words. All of her skills that she had, they're gone. And I thought, how can this woman who has so much inside of her, how can she continue to feel like her life has meaning? And I asked her that question, but I put it in the most loving way I could. Her response to me was, she was a spiritual person. She said, I can always pray. I can always meditate. Oh, sure, my mind goes in and out, and sometimes I can't remember things, but I can always meditate on and pray for things that matter to me. And that may be making a difference. And that brought tears to my eyes, because with my own son, when he couldn't comprehend all of these bodies of knowledge, he just couldn't comprehend certain types of math. They made no sense to him. I watched him, and I watched what fascinated him. And when something fascinated him, we went down that path. He had trouble learning to read, and I couldn't teach him. He had all these different ways in his brain of putting things together. So hired a tutor, someone who could help him. And to this day, at age 37, my son, because I couldn't do it, but that tutor helped him learn how to read in a way that made meaning to him. So there it is. I'm going to lift out of this, Rena, and then invite you to talk about it too. If our educational systems were about imposing information, if they were about shaming children, you're wrong, you're bad if you don't do it this way, or they were about causing children to be afraid, what if I get this wrong? Those systems cannot perpetuate. What perpetuates in early childhood and all the way through is the dynamic of seeking in each person what is meaningful to you. And then, because we have groups of children, how can we come together? So Milagros and Atul and Maria, each one of them, they don't have to have the same quest. but they need to be able, just like Rena and I do from across the world, we need to be able to help each other take the next step in our own quest. How have you, now we're talking about children working with children, which I think is a crucial way of learning when they're all different. What have you discovered about that, about working with groups of children so they can actually bring out the best rather than do what children can do, which is to shame each other, put each other in hierarchies?
There are all children are different. All children are different. They think differently, they perceive differently, they act differently, they write differently, their answers are different. So that is why I never tell them, okay, you have to do this. I tell them, what are you going to do? I put you in this situation. Okay, this is a particular situation. And how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to come out with it? In fact, this is one of the questions for all the teachers that we are appointing also. We put them in situations and we ask an answer for that. And the one who clears it, because I know the correct answer, what it is to be, that person is in.
I love that, because what you're doing is just what we're talking about, where you are inviting people to make meaning of any situation. And I love that Viktor Frankel, the psychiatrist who was put in a concentration camp during World War II for being Jewish, just for being Jewish, he looked at this horrible situation he was in, and he said this powerful statement. He said, the last of the human freedoms is essentially defined meaning in any given set of circumstances. Essentially, it's to find the choice that I need to make in this situation. And here's an example of what Viktor Frankl did. He was a trained therapist, and he, in the concentration camp, was a surgeon. And they were being given all of these demeaning, dirty, awful, degrading things to do. And how did they keep themselves alive in that? It's kind of like they had a continuous pandemic. How did they keep themselves alive? At the end of every day, these two men, the surgeon and the psychiatrist, would come together and they would ask themselves a very simple question. What have we done? What have we learned today that will help us when we are at last able to go back to doing what we love? And you know what they concluded so many of the times, because their work was so degrading? Sometimes they concluded, as long as I can find something to laugh about, not somebody to laugh at, but as long as I can find something to laugh about, I'm going to be okay. And those two men together, now we're talking about community and learning in community, those two men, by seeking individual meaning for themselves, how can I, when I'm out there digging the latrines, how can I find meaning in that? Well, maybe the only meaning I can find is to be able to laugh at myself. And that helps. So these two men were like coaching each other, like life coaches, saying, how do we make meaning out of the absolute worst situation? Two things on this, Rena. When people are otherwise able, they don't have a lot of the capacities that we expect people to have, as with my son. I then ask, how is he otherwise able? How can he find his own pathway to this? And honestly, I was talking with an educator last night, and she said, we're all special needs. And that's true. We all have our own need and our own way to discover what's meaningful and to make an.
You muted yourself.
Thank you so much for reminding me of that. And it's perfect, because it's not about being perfect. Fred Rogers said it's not about being perfect. It's for each one of us, the teacher, the child, the parent, the community member. Here is the question. How can I take what I'm given, who I am, my gifts and my shortcomings? How can I take that and make meaning out of my everyday days in a way that can give back to others? And those 2 points, Rena, How can I make meaning so that it makes sense to me in a way that I can offer something to others? Is that challenge too sophisticated for little children, or can little children from the get-go, from the beginning, find that their own strengths allows them to help their community? What do you think?
It's not an easy question again. This time you're putting me into very difficult questions and difficult situations. Yes. Okay. What I personally feel is that every child, they are gifted with a very different and a unique way of dealing things. So we need to first focus on that. Okay. And a child who can handle a very normal and a very small situation, right, and come out of it. That child is like, okay, our work is half done, because we want the child to be dedicated, determined, individual, and focused. Had he not been having all these four qualities, the child wouldn't have even thought of coming out of it. I think it makes sense, at least for me.
I'm hearing you, and here's what I'm seeing. That, and I know everybody listening has observed this, a child is a universe within herself, just like each adult is a universe within herself. Every time someone comes into my presence that I haven't met before, I'm asking myself, what gift is this person bringing to the world? Especially if the person's cranky and nasty and angry. How can I see this person not in a fake way as being a gift, but what can I learn in my relationship with this person? And that's why the other part of teaching that we were starting to get into, Rena, which is learning in community. How can we help each child connect, engage with the other children in a way that's meaningful to that child first, but also helps the other children? And I don't agree with a lot of the studies that say children don't develop empathy until they're significantly older. I have observed and witnessed children, even babies, infants, who can have concern for another child. And if this is a gift, like Dr. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, if some children have more empathy from the get-go than others, I'm going to help that child expand that gift, not to the point of no longer caring for herself because she's codependently focused on other people, but no, to say, you know what, Milagros, you're so caring with the babies. You're so loving of them. Could you help me this morning when I'm working with so-and-so? Because I think if you were to sing your favorite song to him, that would help him. And here's what I want you to do, because you're learning here too. Tell me what it is about the song that you're singing that touches this baby. When do you notice that the baby gets excited? What parts of the song? Or is it when you make different facial expressions? Or is it when you dance? What is it that baby is connecting to? Look, that is a practicum right there. And, of course, to be developmentally appropriate, asking questions that the child can handle. But, oh my goodness, the way children interact with each other is crucial to their learning. And I believe sometimes in early childhood that we particularly focus on the individual child, and that's beautiful. That's where it all begins. But I think there's also a universe. Rena, what do you think of this? For me, there's a universe in the way a classroom of children come together, in the way two children come together, in the way the teacher and the child comes together. And I feel that is like loaded with riches for ways to also focus on how can this child learn.
Until and unless a child develops that relation, that connect with the teacher, a child cannot learn. First of all, because we as parents, we hand over the kids to the teachers, and it depends on our teachers how they handle them. They say that education starts from home, right? But how long do the kids stay at home apart from pandemic? During pandemic, it's 24/7 the kids are there with the parents, right? How long do they stay? Most of the time they are with the teachers. I'm sorry if I'm offending any of our colleagues, but the fact is that we as teachers, if we take them to be our own children rather than somebody else's child, they will definitely make a difference and they will definitely make us proud.
And that requires, let's just peel that apart, Rena, because what you're saying is it's a gift to each child if I view that child as my child, not to control, not to shape, not to shame, not to inspire fear in, but I, as a member of the learning community, wherever I am, in a family, in a school, in a classroom, in the community, if I see myself in that moment as a member of a community that can help that child become her best, what opportunity does that moment give me? And I'm going to tell you a really simple example. It was like an everyday example. A friend of mine and I were out picking apples. That's something we can do in America. In the fall, when the apples grow on the trees, if you pick your own apples, you can, of course, choose the best. And it's also a lovely way of getting exercise. So I was out with my friend, Ted, who's very tall. And we were picking apples. And another family came, well, we were friends, Ted and I, but a family came by and they were speaking Spanish. I don't speak Spanish well at all. But the little boy spoke English. And I could tell, as we can all tell by the way he was looking at me, that he needed to connect. And so I moved over toward his family and I just asked him, I said, "Hi, I'm Holly, Ellisa. Do you know what apples you love the most?" And immediately, of course, this child, he was like an elementary student. He was able to tell me, "I like the ones that are brightest red. I like the ones that are sweet. I like," and I said, "Well, now I hear you. So now how do you find those apples when there's so many different types of apple trees?" This child started telling me like a scholar. In that day, he had learned the forest, he had learned the orchard, he had learned what he loved. Giving him a chance to simply articulate that was powerful. And here's the second thing, Rena, and I'm going to invite you to look at this too, because it's what you've been saying. Once a child feels heard, honored, and seen by us, then the child wants to share more. And then as the teacher or as the adult, then I can step back and say, let me listen for what this child really wants to do with our connection. And honestly, this powerful thing happened. This child said, sometimes I'm scared to be with other people. I said, well, I thank you for being so honest about that. Do you want to say what's going on? Or something? I just asked a very open-ended question. And he told me about this experience with his mother when his mother and he were in what we call laundromats. Laundromats are places where if you don't have your own washing machine, you can go to places in the community and use the community machines. He and his mother were in a laundromat, and a man started moving in on the mother, and the mother was getting very afraid. Now, this little boy feeling responsible. And he said, I was very afraid after that to be with people. And I said, well, let's look at what did you do? What did you and your mama do to make things better? How did you get help? We ran to my auntie's house. Okay, good. You went to somebody who was safe. What did your auntie do? She let us in and she locked the door. Did you feel better then? Yes, except the man was outside the door. Well, what else did you do? We know to call 911. So my auntie called the police, and I told the police what this man was doing toward my mother. This is, Rena, this is all in the space of 10 minutes with a child, just by asking him about what he had learned that day in the apple orchard. He had something that was burdening him. Now, was it appropriate for him to say this to me? I don't know, but I know it was something he needed to say. And as we all work with children, we hear things we didn't expect to hear. The question is, and I'm going to put this back to you, Rena, how can I respond with love, with openness, without shaming, blaming, or inflaming the child? How can I just listen for how this might be a learning experience for the child? And so with this little guy, I don't even know his name. Through our time together, he had been able to articulate what he liked, why he particularly liked that, what made him scared, what helped him feel safe, and what he could do, and who are the people he could trust in his life. Now, these are life skills. It seems to me every day in early childhood, whether it's virtual or it's in person, children are coming to us with the desire to find out, how can I be safe? How can I feel like I'm loved? How can I do what I love? And how can I express myself? Every opportunity we have with a child is the opportunity to be present and listen to what the child's telling us. You have observed that many times, I'm sure.
Definitely. In fact, I do fall in your like I can't say I can fall into your shoes, but yes, I do try to walk on your footsteps, because many a times you've told me that a child is different. Every child is different and we need to handle every child. I personally feel that I am personally against branding, tagging, and nagging a child. Because the child does not speak up, but they have so many things hidden inside them that at times they don't even open up. And we as adults, at times, we don't have time to listen to what our kids want to say. And I too have done that mistake many times. And I'm admitting it in front of everybody because I have done that mistake. So I just want to tell parents and teachers one thing: don't block the way for your child to move up to you. Give them a path without any boasters in between, a path that is lightened up, showing them the way to come directly to you without any hesitation. Because this is a time when everybody needs to come together and work for humanity.
That is such a beautiful way to conclude, because everything you've just said is also true about my relationship within myself. If I am continuously, as an educator, judging myself, I can't do this, I'm not good at that, I have to do this, or I'm not getting this done. If I am judging myself all the time, I cannot be open to hearing how I can give back. And we are the children's curriculum, Rena. So if a child is watching me and thinking, well, Ms. Holly, she's got so many things to do, she's so busy, she can't listen to me. Guess what? Ms. Holly can't listen to herself either. That's why being mindful with children, I don't mean necessarily doing a meditation practice, but being mindful in the moment, even just saying to children, let's take a moment to listen to the quiet. Let's listen to the quiet and see the clock. When the clock gets to this point, that's when we're going to stop listening. And then I invite each one of you to take that piece of paper in front of you and the colors and draw, what did you hear in the quiet? What did you hear in the quiet? Or if I've got children that don't express themselves that way, then I can ask them to do other things to express how they heard what they heard in the quiet. And isn't that the message here? Rena, you hear what you hear in the quiet. I hear what I hear. But if I'm constricting my pathways, as you said, then I can't hear. If I can clear the pathways, and Robert Frost wrote a poem about this. He said, I'm going to clear the pasture stream. You come too. I'm going to get all the rocks out of the way. I'm going to get the branches out of the way. I'm going to clear the stream in the pasture. You come too. And I believe as we model as I model within myself, how can I stop being in this moment so busy that I can't hear what's going on with me? And if I simply say that to the children, let's take, and some children have trouble with silence, other children love it. But if I say, well, let's take 2 minutes, and how will you guys know when 2 minutes is up? And we talk that through. Then and I want you to listen. Maybe you want to close your eyes. Maybe you want to lie down. But how do you hear what the silence is telling you? And then give them a way to express that. The more I do activities like that, the more I'm coming home to myself and inviting the child to come home to herself. Because in the end, whether it's a pandemic or not, we all get to come home to ourselves. And wouldn't we rather come home to a welcoming, I'm so glad you're here, than a judgmental, you didn't get it right?
I think that is one of the reasons we would be blessed to have you as mentor early childhood education. So this was in a way to announce that you will be joining us as early childhood mentor for us, because every child, they have their base from early childhood education. If that is strong enough, they can definitely do everything. I call it early childhood education is the backbone of any education system, because that is where you let the child know his real worth. If we start with shaming, we start with blaming, nagging, tagging, then I don't think a child will ever be able to grow up into an individual, determined, dedicated, and focused individual that we have been talking about since so long.
And that is honestly something that I focus on in my book. Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You, translating trauma's harsh legacy into healing. I'm just going to show this book because over and over again, what we talk about here is working with children and with ourselves to find the strengths. And as I find my strengths and as I find the strengths in each child, that makes it easier for us safer to partner on the places where I don't feel I have strengths. So if I feel like the child is showing herself and showing me, I can do this with colors. I can express how I feel. But when it comes to fine motor control, like maybe the child isn't very good with a fine point, that's okay, because what we do then always, instead of what you just said of tagging and shaming and blaming, what we do is we build on the strengths. Milagros, how you combine that red and that blue and came out with the most vibrant purple. Have you ever seen that purple in a flower? Oh yes, teacher, I have seen that purple in my backyard every day when this flower blooms. Then building upon that, let's look at how you can take this pen and shape it. Don't worry about getting it right, but shape it into something that's beautiful to you. And we'll just keep working on that. So there it is, my friend. I really appreciate your inviting me to be with you, because together you and I and everybody that's with us is invited to ask, no matter what age you are, no matter what age I am, no matter what age the children we're working with, how can we within ourselves model the pathway of being a lifelong learner, which means how can we always throughout our lives, as Rilke said, love the questions.
Exactly. To wrap up with,
much.
love the questions. Quick question, 3 questions. First, how do you see education, virtual education in another coming 3 years?
It's going to be a both and. It's going to be a hybrid. Yes, I think what we're going to do is see that it rarely again will it be an either or. We're going to have virtual education ongoing with children from the youngest age. And our challenge is to find ways, as Rena has said all throughout this, to make it personal, to make it engaging, to touch each child. Fred Rogers in this country did virtual education for years. He never met those children. But what did he do? He sang to the children. He used chants. He used movement. He used music. He invited people from his neighborhood in. And he would sing to each child. He would look into the camera and he would sing to each child, won't you be my neighbor? So I believe, Rena, and everybody listening, yes, virtual learning is here to stay for children, very young, and adults. And our challenge is, how can we make this intimate and personal? And we have a real role model already in Fred Rogers.
Right. Second question. How effective is online education examination system?
That's very mixed. That's very, very mixed. Because the question is, what are we examining?
Exactly.
And if we're examining the child's ability or the adult's ability to spit back information, then I don't know, that we have over the centuries managed to figure out how to do that. But the deeper question is, if I want the child to be a lifelong learner, how can I examine the child in a way that allows that child to express to me what she has learned? And maybe we need to do something different. Like maybe we need to find different ways to, and I don't think examine is the word, but to invite the child to reveal to us what she has learned that matters to her, that's about making meaning. And two, what are the questions you still have, honey? What do you want to find out about next? Because honestly, if I'm with a child and she can articulate not only what she's learned that matters to her, but what questions she has for today, then I know that we've accomplished as educators what we need to be doing. So I think I would go back to the very first question. What is the purpose of an examination? Is it to have children say that they have a body of knowledge? Well, if so, we've been doing that for years. We can do that virtually as well as in person. If the question is, how can we invite each child, almost like a doctoral student? What do we do with doctoral students? We invite them in to talk about what they've learned and what matters. Exactly. So how can we find ways to do that with children?
Okay, another question. Currently, the entire scenario in education has changed. It's completely changed. So, how do you see physical fitness getting involved in this so that the kids, they don't become couch potatoes? The kids
Absolutely good point. And you were making this point before, and I want to say, look, just because something's virtual doesn't mean it's not real. And real means living in my body. Now, I can sit at a chair Zooming 24/7, or I can say, I'm not so good at this, but I'm learning because I'm a lifelong learner, right? I can say to myself, you know what, Holly, Ellisa, you've been sitting doing Zoom programs for the last 3 hours. You need to get outside now. You need to go out, breathe fresh air, get into your body. And that is, that's how an adult talks. But I think to answer your question more specifically, even though maybe especially because it's virtual, we need to model movement. We need to take, depending upon the age of the child. For little children, it might have to be every 5 to 10 minutes. You know, let's sing. Okay, now it's time to sing this song. And Atul, would you lead us in the dance? Okay, so Atul is doing all these things, and then and Milagros, would you sing the next verse? Moving all the time. What I need to say is, it's the same problem we had with traditional education. We started putting children in chairs. We started making children sit still. That is not the way
In fact, we started forcing the children to wear school uniforms and sit in front of the camera.
That's right, because it was all about defining themselves from the outside in. How do you look to other people? What impression are you making? Now that's important, but the more we evolve as people, it's not so much from the outside in, what appearance are we giving? It's what connection are we making? And that goes right back to your original point, Rena. It's all about building connections with people. It's not so much about managing my image. Like, hey, I'm a person, whether I've got Einstein here or whatever. The thing is, how can we make connections virtually? And I believe that there's a whole lot of creativity that can take place there.
Yes.
That
is right. And that is how SEAS Global Institute came into being.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I look forward very much to working with you all, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say as we go along. Thank you for those 3 questions.
You're most welcome.
Namaste.
Namaste. So here we end our session for today. Tomorrow we are going to be here back with our dear Effie. She's another creative person who is always full of energy and joy and lots of learning. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Namaste and good night.